Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Ariel Johnson from the Leakey Foundation, a nonprofit that supports human evolution research and shares discoveries. Today, we are rebroadcasting a throwback episode featuring Dr. Patrick Gathogo, discussing the geology of South Turkwel and what we can learn about human evolution from studying petrology. Next month, Dr. Elaine Guevara will join us to discuss what we can learn about aging from primates, our epigenetic clocks, and much more. Be sure to stay up to date with the latest discoveries and episodes by subscribing to our channel and clicking the notification bell so you don't miss a thing. I also have a very exciting opportunity to share with you to help us make more episodes of Lunch Break Science possible. Thanks to a generous donor, your donations made during this period will be matched, which means that your impact will be doubled. So a $25 donation will have $50 worth of impact, which is really incredible and will be so just vital to helping us make sure we have more episodes and more education programs. So you can donate through YouTube Giving, which is just at the bottom of the YouTube page, or you can visit leakeyfoundation.org/donate to donate to this program. Anyway, so we will be turning the virtual floor over to Dr. Patrick Gathogo in the rebroadcast, and I will see you all after. I will be in the chat, so if you want to say hi, please be sure to do so. Okay, see you after the episode. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you also. It's an honor.
Patrick originally hails from Kenya and joins us today from Houston. Patrick is an adjunct associate professor at the University of Utah, associate research professor at Stony Brook University, and associate researcher in the geology department of the National Museums of Kenya. His work has taken him to sites all over Africa, with his core research focused on the Lake Turkana region, where we are zooming in right now, and he'll be discussing this during his talk. Oh, actually, during the whole episode. Before we hear from Patrick, if you are watching this episode live, please post comments or questions for Patrick in the chat, and he'll be answering them live during the episode. The earlier you get those questions in, the more likely your question may be featured. Patrick, I love learning new things from guests, and I learned something new from you. What is petrology?
So petrology is the detailed study of rock materials, minerals, and organic material, and also mineralized fossil remains. And we usually use a microscope and other methods to look at things at a very, very detailed level. So it's almost like molecular biology or DNA for the geologist.
Yeah, like I think you mentioned when we first met, when you were describing it to me, it was like the genetics of rocks, which I think is such a cool thing. So like, like when we think of it, what are some like examples like of what you're looking at when you're thinking of petrology?
So in petrology, we can just take a piece of rock and slice it almost to the thickness, a third of the thickness of a human hair, and look through it. And we'll be able to see minerals, very small microscopic features. And to some extent, we can even see things that are smaller, almost the size of bacteria or virus.
Wow.
Because that's really tell us how it gives an opportunity to understand how the rocks behave, because those are the basic building blocks.
Oh, it's so cool. So what are we seeing in this one?
So here we are actually seeing some kind of, these are quartz crystals. So you're seeing them under the microscope, and they are showing you like the birthmarks and in genetic material that differentiate each minerals and how it was formed.
I need to see them so close. Yeah. So you've worked on a number of projects. What are some of your favorite projects?
So some of my favorite projects are actually from the Turkana Basin, and one of them involved the discovery of Kenyanthropus platypus, which is from Lomekwi area, together with Dr. Leakey. And that was even before I did my undergraduate degree with Frank Brown. So that's one of them, and there's another one from the Ileret region, where I also helped with the discovery of another hominid. So those are some of the most memorable findings that have been associated with. Yeah.
Oh, and then this is back at Lamekwi.
So this is back at Lomekwi. I was an undergraduate student there with Frank Brown. And there's something very unique about Lomekwi, which I will discuss later, because of the comparison that it has with South Turkwel, which is the area that was funded by the Leakey Foundation.
So, in addition to your, the research you do, you also do consultation work. What is the role of a consultant?
So for the consulting work that I do, I've been working as a reservoir petrologist, and it's a very interesting relationship with Frank Brown, because he was a petrologist, and most of his students who pursued the petrology area ended up working in the oil and gas industry, because petrology is very, very useful tool in the industry. But the knowledge is transferable. Some of what we learn in the oil and gas, it can also be used in the study of human evolution, and that is what Frank used to do a lot.
You mentioned Frank. I guess who is Frank, and who were your other mentors?
So Frank Brown was my academic advisor and mentor. I worked with him in Turkana Basin for a very long time. And my other mentor was Leakey, who is pictured there next to me. And so those were my main mentors. And Leakey is still my mentor, and Richard Leakey also used to be my mentor.
Oh, that's a great group of mentors to have.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Frank Brown was co-chair of the Leakey Foundation's Scientific Executive Committee until his untimely death in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
But the Leakey Foundation and Frank's daughters, Elise Brown Ursoy and Erica Brown Gaddis, established the Francis H. Brown African Scholarship Fund to fulfill Frank's wishes to provide financial assistance to East African researchers and students pursuing research in earth sciences and botany related to human origins. Erica and Elise, who are now board members of the Leakey Foundation, are so excited that we're featuring you on Lunch Break Science. And it's a question for you. They asked, what are the areas of research that you are most interested in pursuing? And how did the Francis H. Brown African Scholarship help you prepare for this work?
So my main area that I'm interested in, and which I think I really have been able to contribute a lot as far as the human evolution studies are concerned, is the application of petrology for the study of geology in East Africa, and particularly to use the knowledge that I've gained in the industry and try to use it in the Turkana Basin. And the funding that I got from the Leakey Foundation was actually very, very important, because it gives me a head start to start applying that kind of technology at South Turkwel area. And it was a very critical site, because that's a project that Frank Brown had already started, and before he passed away, he was not able to finish it. So I was sort of left with that responsibility of completing it, and the funding helped me to do a lot of analysis, which would otherwise been very difficult to justify.
In honor of Frank and Elise, are matching donations to the Francis H. Brown African Scholarship. The way that this works is if you donate $25, your donation will have be matched and have $50 worth of impact. We are excited to help the next generation of East African scientists, just like Patrick, and hope that you will help us too. We've shared a link in the chat to learn more about the program. We just want to thank Erica and Elise so much for this generous contribution. Patrick, mentorship has been clearly a very important part of your career. What are you doing to mentor the next generation of scientists?
So I geology student, one of the things that Frank told me when he took me on as a student is sometimes geology can be very difficult, and it's very important that you get students very early and be able to take them through research and all the activities involved. So what I do also is try to get involved with students, even undergraduate, and try to give them the experience in the field so that I can increase their curiosity, particularly in the area of geology. So I'm mentoring several African students. They're going to the local universities. So that's what I've been doing. And every time I have a chance to go to the field, I try to work with our students, whether they are geology majors or not, because geology can be applicable even in other areas, archaeology, paleontology, and as long as you're dealing with rocks.
So, I mean, geology, I think it's not something we've featured too many times on Lunch Break Science, but what was it about geology that really interested you in pursuing that?
Actually, it's a very interesting story, because as I was growing up as a student in Kenya, I used to see this news about discoveries of a lot of very strange looking animals, or fossils, they called them. And when I went to the museum, they basically looked like rock. So I was very much interested to see what kind of soil they have in Turkana that could be able to be preserving these sediments. And when I met Frank, he was almost like a magician. He could look at the rocks, tell whether it was a river or a lake, and I really wanted to have the ability to understand that. So that's what got me very, very interested in rocks. Being able to read them like you can read a textbook, and be able to see a lot of things that other people would not be able to see.
I cannot wait to actually jump into your talk. So we're going to turn the virtual floor over to you very shortly. But before we do that, if you want to learn more about human evolution, amazing research going on all over the world, and the latest discoveries, start by subscribing to the Leakey Foundation's YouTube channel and clicking the notification bell so you don't miss a thing. Now, let's turn the virtual floor over to Patrick and hear more about his research.
Okay. So it's a presentation that combines a lot of things that I've done with Frank Brown, and some of the work that I've continued since he passed away, and what I plan to pursue. So in the presentation, I'll mostly discuss about the geologic context of the Turkana Basin in terms of understanding the Rift Valley, because that's very important to understand what has been happening in the basin. And then I'll focus more on this South Turkwel site, which is a site that was funded by the Leakey Foundation to do some petrology study, and some of the challenges that we still face even up to date in terms of geochronology. And then I'll talk about the application of some of the techniques that I have developed in the oil and gas industry to studies on humans' evolution. So to start with, so this is the location of the Turkana Basin at the center there. And what you notice is that in East Africa, we have a very highest concentration of huge lakes, and they basically aligned along the reef system. It's a very active reef system. It's basically pulling apart at the rate at which your fingernails and toenails grow. So and associated with that, you have a lot of faulting, which are the source of the big lakes, and a lot of volcanic centers, and it sort of has a customized climate and flora and fauna, because even though it's near the equator, the topography from the rift has changed a lot of things that we see presently in East Africa. So that's the main context. And I always try to give people a perspective of how big the Turkana Basin is. And in this map, I place it next to the map of the US showing the state of California. And you can see the drainage basin of the Turkana Basin. If you place it to the northern border, it will almost reach Los Angeles to the south. So it's a really huge basin. And Frank always used to tell me, you can have 100 geologists working there mapping the basin, and they will never run out of work by the time they retire if they start as students. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of geologists doing that kind of work, and that's why Frank Brown laid a lot of emphasis in trying to support students who would be doing field geology and botany. So the work in the Turkana Basin, more than what we understand right now, began in the 60s from the Omo expedition. And above there, you can see the first team of experts with Frank Brown at the back row there. So they did a lot of work, and Frank Brown, as a student, started mapping the geology of the area, and he developed a method where he could use volcanic ashes that are from the eruption and find some chemical signature, and then he would use them as stratigraphic markers. And together with volcanic ashes, he would look at the crystals that were erupted during the same eruption, and he would get isotopic date from the crystals. So that way you have a combination of stratigraphic markers and the exact age of the volcanic ash eruption. And this is the map that he came up with. So he was able to develop tephrostratigraphy, which is using volcanic ash layers, and chronostratigraphy, using the crystals from the same eruption to get the age. And you can see here, he was able to create a very good map of the area in the early 80s that we still use up to date. And the ages are shown on the right there, ranging all the way from 4 million years up to present. And the ashes that were used for dating. Okay. So, and a lot of work has been done in the basin since then. And a lot of it has a lot to do with his contribution. And I was lucky to be involved in some of the work that he did. And you can see there on the map on the left, the mapping includes not just the outcrop on the surface, but the sediment below the surface. And you can see some of those sediments go up to 4,000 meters below the surface. And it's mostly a system that is associated with rifting. So they create scarp. You have a crack on the earth, and then there is a displacement along that crack, which result to formation of a fault. And then you have something that is almost like a swimming pool. And the deep end will be very near the fault scarp, and the shallow end will be on the opposite side. And that's what we call half graben. And you can see in the green area in the middle of the lake, they're switching back and forth, left and right. So a series of those major faults. So that has played a very important role in understanding what has been happening in the basin. And even the most important thing is to know when some of these events have been happening. And if you know when they have been happening, that it becomes very easy for you to do prospecting and look for other new deposits, because that is what we want to be able to do as geologists, is to expand the area where we can look for fossils. And even though for the last 50 or so years, a lot of work has been done in the Turkana Basin, and Frank has been able to do analysis of more than 2,500 samples of volcanic ashes. And there on the right, on the left, you can see that a chart that shows the stratigraphic markers with their ages that have been identified across the basin. And they range all the way from isotopic ages from crystals to paleomag dating, which was actually developed from mid-oceanic spreading ridges, and it was also applied in the Turkana Basin. So there are very many methods that we have been able to use for dating the layers of deposit in the Turkana Basin. And when we tell people that we still have challenges with geochronology in the Turkana Basin, it's really hard for them to believe, because we have basically the best dated stratigraphic interval for Pliocene and Pleistocene. But we still have difficulties. And for example, the example that I'm going to give for South Turkwel is a very good illustration of that. And the common limitations for doing that are usually associated with sample processing and selection, because sometimes if you're not very careful and you process the samples, or when you're doing analysis, you remove some of the important components of those volcanic caches, then you will end up with a biased results. And that's why this method, when Frank Brown was developing it, he developed it together with petrology techniques that you would be able to use to clean the volcanic ashes so that you're not taking away some important components. And it is from that method that he moved from the initially known about 4 tuffs that were believed to be in the basin to what we have now, up to 380 volcanic ashes. And then sometimes you might not be able to get a lot of help from absolute dating method, where you take a sample and put it in a machine and then you get a number. Sometimes you just have to go to the field and use the traditional method of dating for you to get a better age. And that is very well illustrated by the method that Frank used for dating one of the basalts in the basin. And I'll talk about it briefly. So you have to put the geologic context your samples before you can be able to come up with a good age. And sometimes you have stratas that are just floating. They are bound between faults, and you don't have a stratigraphic marker that you can be able to use for dating. And that's also the case that we have with southern South Turkwel area. So, and the method that I described, the traditional way of doing dating, which is called a physical stratigraphic dating method, you're basically going to the field and making observation and collecting physical evidences and inferring relationship between various features that you see, faults, basalts, all sorts of sediments, and you can be able to come up with a very good, better estimate of the age. So, and in this method, you rely very much on the petrology technique. And sometimes some of the things that you see, like the picture there on the right, are very, very simple observation, can really be help you to resolve the date, the age of some of these events. And that's what I'll be illustrating. So, and this shows how powerful petrology is, and that's why I'm excited to be able to use that technique in order to enhance our understanding of the Turkana Basin geology. So, and this is an example that Frank used to give to people, and I still like giving this example. And the example was the Gombe group basalt that are shown there, and that's me standing in front of some very beautiful columnar basalt. They used to puzzle Frank for a very long time, because when you look at them, they are petrologically similar in terms of the minerals, and that means they basically formed in the same area. They're basically same family, but the ages were very, very different that we were getting from lab measurements. They range from 3.5 million years and even about 5 million years. So very, very big variation, and that was a problem until and I was there when this happened. We went to the field with Frank, and we made the observation that is shown there on the right. And that was the contact between the basalt and the lake sediment. And we noticed that the contact was chilled. Okay, so that means the basalt came in when it was very hot, and it intruded into lake deposits. And we went all over the basin for the next 3 or 4 years, taking samples of those basalt. And finally, we were able to confine them to about 4 million years, just by using that relationship that we were observing in the field. And that's an example to show that sometimes you can't just rely on calculation that you get from the lab based on isotope. You could be having a problem with mineral transformation that you might not be able to identify when you're sampling. So, and we were able to develop a story of actually how the basin formed 4 million years ago, and how rift tectonics, the diagram shown below there, you have a crack starting to form as the basin is pulling apart because we are within the rift valley. And then when the faults, the the cracks go deep enough, then they slide against one another. And then you start having some kind of a swimming pool, kind of a basin with a deep end near the big fault. And then a lake would start to form. And that is the lake that you see there on the right. And soon enough, the basalts will start, the magma will start melting at the bottom, and then it will be ejected out through some of those faults. And that's why we have very widespread basalt volcanism in the basin taking place within a very, very short period of time. So, and by that kind of understanding shows how powerful just using simple techniques, observation in the field can be able to help you to come up with a very, very good dating method, an alternative to the absolute lab dating method. So one of the two areas that Frank Brown was very interested with when I met him was the Lomekwi area where Kenyanthropus were discovered, and the South Turkwel area, which is shown here on the right, because it represented a time interval where we did not have a lake above the locature tuff. So that gave us a very good area where we could see what was happening with the hominids and other animals that were living during that time interval. So, and there are a lot of similarities that we saw between the Lomekwi area and the South Turkwel area. One of them is the tuff, which is dated at 4.2 million years old. So the lake was there, so it's in both areas, and the locature tuff was in both areas, and in both areas, the lake, the rivers, the tuff is overlain by fluvial or river deposits, and there were a lot of fossils that were coming there from there. And then we saw evidence that there was a big river, which is the main Omo River, and some other river that were developing from the side, which is now the ancient Turkwel River. But the challenge with the South Turkwel area is that the hominid were coming from the area that is shown there with the star. It's bounded on the left and the right by two major faults. And the only specimen that we saw there, marker bed that we saw there, was a volcanic ash, which is here described as the Patrick stuff. And then 1 year later, they made a very, very important discovery of fossils from very near where that volcanic ash is. So we realized that we have to really try and understand the age of that would be very, very important. And that is what Frank Brown was doing for a while until he passed away. And after that, I took over the project to try and finish it. And these are some of the final conclusion that he came up with, and which my work supports. And so he was able to create some kind of relationship between the different blocks that are faulted. The Western block, which is we know very well because there's a volcanic ash there for 4.2 million years old, which is shown there on the right. And the middle block, where the fossil come from, there was the volcanic ash, which is called the Patrick's ash. We were not able to find anything we could date, and it did not correlate with anything that we know in the basin. So that was problematic. But on the block to the right, which is where the locature is, we knew the age of that because of the locature tuff. So we had to use petrology. I had to use petrology in order for me to try and see whether the hominid block is sourcing sediment from the same area at the block to the east and the block to the west. So that way you can link them just based on the petrology of the sediments that they are carrying. And the results that are found, come up with so far, it shows that it's very consistent with what we see at the Lomekwi area, and also what we expect to see here in South Turkwel. So it means that that section actually lies between the Lomnium Lake of 4.02 million years and the locature tuff, which is 3.6 million years. And the other methods that were tried, including Palymag, were very conclusive. And so far, I'm very confident that the petrology finding are going to hold in this case. And these are the results from the volcanic ash that we got from there. So the Patrick's volcanic ash. So it's a very, very unique volcanic ash. It doesn't match any of the 2,500 samples of volcanic ash that we have from the basin. And it's very interesting because it has two modes. There are several other tuffs that have two modes, and one of them is Lokochot. But this is definitely not the Lokochot because of the chemistry. So that eliminates that correlation. And there was an attempt to correlate it with the Lokalale tuff, which is about 2.5 million years. But the Lokalale tuff has only one mode. So if you try to ignore the other mode, that might lead to very misleading interpretation, just the same way we had with the KVS tuff controversy. So any correlation that we will do on this volcanic ash, we have to identify the two modes. And the closest match was a volcanic ash that I collected to Loyangalani area, which is to the southeast, to the south, southeast, marked there as LN, and it's also early Pliocene. And there's another one from Ileret, which is to the northeast, and it also has two modes, and it's also early Pliocene. So everything is just indicating that this block, the Hominid block, would be early Pliocene more than anything else. So concluding, one of the things that I plan to continue doing is continue using petrology and expand it to other areas that we could be able to use because it's used extensively in the oil and gas industry. A lot for geochronology, for deposition environment, for a lot of things, because sometimes the only thing that they get are very small pieces of rocks from the drilling process. Some of them are almost the size of a bean or a peanut. And with petrology, that's not a problem because you can still be able to get a lot of information from that. And petrology can be used together it can give results that can be used for geochemistry and the physical aspect, textures, even electrical properties, and even biological, because you can be able to see microfossils. And that is how most of the old rocks, including oil and gas reservoirs, are dated. They are dated based on microfossils that they identify using petrology tools. And so there is basically no limitation in terms of the size or even the kind of alteration of the sample. And alteration can be a problem when you're trying to date even basalts and other rocks. That's why we get erroneous dates out of them. And currently, we are planning to develop a petrology lab with the Turkana Basin Institute in the field and equip it so that people can be able to do very simple analysis, because there are some analysis that you can already be able to do in the field, even without taking the samples to the lab. So, and then the other one is trying to extend the application of petrology, not just for stratigraphy and mapping outcrop geology, but also getting the provenance of the sediment and also studying about the preservation of fossils. In the pictures that you see there on the right, you see that microorganisms, we know from the industry, my experience in the industry, that microorganisms are very important in terms of transformation of animal remains into fossil. They will determine whether you're going to have the fossil silicified, calcified, and together with the chemical components that are in the water. And some of them could be from the volcanic ashes. And you can see one of the students there holding a fossil wood from the Ileret area. The fossilization there is very different because the sediments there are mostly composed of volcanic ashes. And normally, fossilization of wood would be silicification, as you can see there at the bottom. But there are also some other areas that we see where fossilization of the wood is from calcite. Okay, and one of the example is in Basin site, which is the southern part of the Basin area called Napodet. So, and there, when you look closely, you can start to see those are some of the processes that you can be able to study very well using petrology tools. So the purpose is to extend the application of petrology, not just to geochronology, but also to other aspects of understanding of the fossils. Okay. So, and I think that's my last slide. Yeah, that is my last slide.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was a really fascinating. I still feel like every time I talk to you, I learn so much.
Yeah.
So we were going to get to our audience's or our viewers' questions, but we have a comment that okay. Amelia says being able to go out into the field with Dr. Gathogo was incredible. Seeing some of the basalt deposits in person was amazing. So
Okay. Yeah, good to hear.
I'm sure it sounds like you probably have a lot of students who share a
Yeah, that was one of the students. I'm very, very glad to hear that kind of comment. It makes me proud and to know that whatever I'm doing is effective and reaching to the students. Yeah, that's one of the field trip that I took to the Napodet area where we have calcified wood material, a very, very interesting type of preservation.
And you're just back from the field, from the Turkana Basin.
Yeah. I just got back from the field. Yeah.
It was amazing that we were able to make this work in between your busy schedule and being in the field. But if you are watching and have not submitted your question, be sure to get those questions into the chat right now. Let's take our first question from our viewers. So Jean has a question. Let's see here. She says, hello, Patrick. Great visuals along with your discussion. How much time can you spend at Turkana?
At a time, usually I go there, even if I just have 2 weeks, I try just to go there, and maybe I can do something those 2 weeks, but I can also stay even up to 2 months. And I try to go there as often as possible. Yeah.
We have another question from Jean. What exactly is tuff?
Oh, so tough when you have a volcanic eruption, especially when the viscosity is very high. It's like when you shake soda pop, and then you open suddenly. So that kind of a very, very fine glass that is produced from the eruption is actually what end up being volcanic, end up being tough, and it's mixed together with other sediment and transported along a river. So under the microscope is basically glass, tiny glasses. Yeah.
I want to say, is the tuff tough? Sorry. We'll get to our next question comes from H. H says, hi, Patrick. Can you tell us a little bit about how the pandemic affected your various projects?
It did affect a lot because we were not able to travel from the US to the field, even though TBI was open, but it was very difficult to even move from Nairobi to the field because everybody was panicked. So I ended up shifting a lot of my projects, including this one that was funded by the Leakey Foundation by at least a year. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you're able to get back out into the field and, can continue on with your work. Our next question comes from Pete. Fantastic, fascinating. Thank you, Patrick. Can you tell when in the last few million years was the water level in the basin at its highest?
The last few million years. So the last time that we know the lake was very high, leave alone the last 5,000 or 10,000 years, is around 300,000 years. And that's where Charlo Mandi is working in the Nato Domeri area. And during that time, the lake actually drained to the Nile system instead of going to the Indian Ocean. But there are several other times within the last 4 million years that we know the lake has been really as big as at that time. Yeah. One of them is 4 million years. Yeah.
So you had just mentioned the Nato-Dameri area, and you've worked there as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is going on in that spot now?
So Nato-Dameri area is really interesting because it's a time interval where we don't have a lot of sediments in the basin. So we have a gap. We don't know what is happening during that time interval. But that is the time interval between what we have as ancient animals, including hominid, and then the modern anatomically looking human being. So and that's the time interval that Charlo is working. And Frank was also working there, and I'm helping with the geology. Charlo. So that's a very, very, very time interval. The lake level was very high, and of course, a lot of things were very different. So we are getting to understand how the basin looked like at that time.
Our next question comes from Protic. Amazing lecture. I'm from India. In India, there is a lot of animal fossils, but are found, but there's a lack of hominin fossils. Why?
I don't want to go into speculations, but yeah, it would be interesting to try and understand why there are no hominids there. But it's a good question too. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll have to find somebody to answer that question for you.
Yes.
Okay. Our next question is from Amelia. Amelia says we're actually just discussing a question to ask. We know that formations are named based on their locality. We were wondering if Dr. Gathogo ever got the chance to name something himself.
So not a formation. I've gotten a chance to name volcanic ashes, and actually the one at South Turkwel, everybody calls it Patrick Star, but that's not a formal name. So we will have to change its name to some local name once we publish it and we do the chemistry for it. And so I've gotten that opportunity to name various, including basalts. Yeah.
Amelia has another question, a follow-up question. Let's see here. Steve from TBI would like to know why it is so hard to figure out a date for the new hominid site.
Yeah, it's because of it's in an isolated fault block, and we don't have a stratigraphic marker within that fault block that we can relate to anything within the basin. So, and you can try and do paleomark dating, but paleomark tells you whether you're normal or reversed, and then you have to put that information in context. You have to have a tie line that has a number age to each. So that is why it has been very difficult to get an age estimate for that hominid locality.
Well, thank you, Amelia, Steve, and all our friends at the Turkana Basin Institute for sending along some questions. Our next question comes from Brandon. Are there any new technologies on the horizon that will improve geology research?
Equipment, yes. The equipment have been developing very rapidly, and the technology, a lot of that technology is becoming very, very much affordable. And one of the technology that we're exploring and using right now includes a micro CT. Because it's non-destructive, and you can be able to look inside a fossil without breaking it. And when you combine it with other tools, you can even be able to get some kind of a chemical distribution or mineral distribution and tie it to the sediments where it's coming from. So hopefully we'll be able to provenance surface collection to the sediment using that kind of technology. Yeah.
Our next question comes from Anne-Marie. She said, "Good afternoon, Patrick. Great presentation. Seems like there's a theme here. They all like your presentation. How does basalt cool into columns? Does it only happen above ground or can also happen under lake deposits?
So a lot of those columnar basalts are usually the ones we see on the surface. Okay, so and I think that's from my examples that I know are usually eruption that get to the surface. Yeah, if they cool down, then they will form very strange kind of crystals to them. Yeah.
Our next question comes from Lou. Lou asks, when will the Rift Valley get flooded by the sea?
Yeah, that used to be a story that was very topical a long time ago, because they were saying, because of all these basalts that we have developing along the Rift Valley, one day the eastern side and the western side will tear apart and we'll have an ocean in between, because basalts usually form in the ocean floor. So there was that story, but I think now the understanding is that that is not going to be an ocean floor. It's just a Rift Valley. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that we want to get as many fossils out of there before anything like that would happen. So I have a last question for you, because we've talked a lot about your mentors and Frank Brown's legacy. What would you like to see your legacy being?
That's a very difficult question. I think it's petrology. I want to be able to see the people in human evolution being able to see use the same kind of technology that is being used by the oil and gas industry, because it's mostly about understanding and knowledge. So to an extent that we would be able to explore for a lot of very many sites, even without having to go and walk directly in the field. We could probably use satellite images and drone to be able to do geological mapping very easily and very fast. So I think if I'm able to develop technology in petrology to be used to that extent that is being used by the even construction industry, they use petrology a lot. Actually, some of the best paid petrology work in the construction industry, because it happens that you can be able to know the mechanical material properties of rock by just looking at the section samples and SEM. So I want to be able to bring this technology back to human evolution. So if I'm able to do that, I think that will be something that I will be very proud of. Yeah.
Well, you're gonna have to keep us tuned, and keep us all posted, and we'd love to have you back to hear about what is next for you. But just thank you so much for joining us today, Patrick. Thank you all so much for watching this episode along with me, this throwback episode. And thank you so much for your support. We raised $50, which will have $100 worth of impact, helping us make new episodes and more. You can also support by liking and sharing our videos and subscribing to stay up to date with the latest episodes. Next time on Lunch Break Science, we meet Dr. Elaine Guevara, who will discuss what we can learn about aging from primates, our epigenetic clocks, and more. Thank you all for taking a break from your day and feeding your brain with the Leakey Foundation. Until next time, stay hungry for knowledge. Lunch Break Science is brought to you by the Leakey Foundation and made possible by the generous support of the Ann and Gordon Getty Foundation, Camilla and George Smith, and the Joan and Arnold Travis Education Fund, as well as viewers like you. Show your support of Lunch Break Science by subscribing to our channel, clicking on notifications, and giving us a thumbs up, or making a donation to help us create new content. Still craving science and can't wait for the next episode? You can feast on the Leakey Foundation's content library with past episodes, lectures, our podcast origin stories, and more. Thank you all for tuning in, and see you next time.